This is NDTV, and you're watching NDTV Prime.
Welcome. As India turns 70, I have a very special panel of people with me right now. They're not just entrepreneurs, they're not just founders of companies that you're all familiar with. They are, in a sense, in my opinion, the makers, some of the makers of modern India. Let me introduce my panel to you right away. I'm joined by Anu Acharya from Hyderabad. She's founder and CEO of Map My Genome, a DNA testing startup. Also with me in Delhi, Abhiraj Bahel, founder and CEO of Urban Clap, a mobile service marketplace. Prashant Tandon, founder and CEO of 1MG, a digital health startup. And Nishant Patni joining us from Jaipur. He's the founder and CEO of Culture Alley. It's a language learning company. Thanks all so much for taking our time to be with us on the program. Anu, let me just start by asking you about, the idea. When we talk about making a modern India, we of course are still not clear what modern India is going to be all about, but we have some idea of the kind of India that we'd like to create. How does an entrepreneur really fit into this? How do ideas like all of you have fit into this game plan? What do you believe is going to be the big ticket contribution of India's entrepreneurs into creating the India of our dreams?
Ideas for most entrepreneurs come when, one, you have some background, based on your education, based on what you have experienced in life. But second is to identify a problem that, others can't see the same way that you do. But the third is that, once these ideas come, to start thinking about completely out-of-the-box ideas to be able to solve it, not necessarily in the way that a lot of other people would have particularly solved that problem. So I think, that's the way ideas normally come about.
Abhiraj, when we talk about out-of-the-box ideas, how important is it? Because, there are all those who say that, if you can't improve it, then just copy it. We've seen a lot of that happen in India. I guess that is par for the course as well. But does consciously an entrepreneur have to keep that in mind that, it's got to be hatke, it's got to be new? And I would imagine that really is a big challenge because it seems, at least at the moment, that it's already been thought of.
So I think a couple of things that are important here. One is to realize that India has lots and lots of problems. And many of them will get solved through entrepreneurship. There is only that much that the government can do. Some of these problems are unique to India and therefore will need solutions that are completely unique and have never been done anywhere before. And some of these problems have in some shape or form been tried and solved, and they have to be Indianized, but they need not be completely...
Go back to the drawing board. Really.
Exactly.
Okay.
New solutions. I don't think there's anything wrong in taking inspiration or to that effect, trying to Indianize a playbook that has worked elsewhere in the world, as long as it makes fundamental first principles sense. What often happens is that entrepreneurs take business models that have worked overseas, which don't fundamentally make sense for India, and try to implement it in India, which don't fundamentally solve any problem. That I think is wrong. But as long as there is a large enough problem that needs to be solved, if it's completely Indianized, great, go for India first solution. If it's a problem that the rest of the world has seen, and if you can actually learn from the rest of the world, take best practices and Indianize the playbook, then do that.
Okay. Prashant, but you agree that, often we see a copy-paste idea. The point that Abhiraj is making doesn't necessarily work. It doesn't sort of, in certain areas in the startup community, we've seen that. But do you see entrepreneurs, enough entrepreneurs? I mean, you are, of course, those who have stayed one step ahead of the game. But do you see enough entrepreneurs sort of doing this consciously? Because entrepreneurship is so sort of mainstream and, it's just so much, it's so fashionable, it's so cool.
So I think it's par for the course. You'll have all kinds of players in all kinds of spaces, and I think as Abhiraj also mentioned, no harm in not reinventing a wheel that has been made pretty nicely elsewhere. Having said that, you have to figure out whether it will roll on your roads. And what we did see over the last few years is there are cycles of boom and bust, and when capital is cheap, people typically go for what sounds like an easier solution and do not apply. They try to solve problems using capital rather than solve problems using, as mentioned earlier, first principles. So problems are problems and they need to be solved in the context of the problem. Now, the tools that you use, the models that you use, whether you need to invent them specifically or you need to just bring the best out there and put it together for your consumer and your needs. I don't think it really matters as long as you can solve the problem. So I think it's about staying true to those basic first principles and not trying to just solve problems that don't exist or try and solve
for solutions
or
perhaps
or solve with mechanisms that don't solve the problem. With basically throwing money at a problem doesn't make it go away.
And that's an interesting point. You just mentioned, Abhiraj, I want to get you in at this stage. The point that Prashant mentioned, that capital is not the solution to any problem. Now, I think around 2 years ago, if we spoke to any entrepreneur and asked them, the young ones starting out, and what is the biggest challenge, capital was the first one. Yeah. It was almost a no-brainer. But I've noticed that more recently those answers are changing. They're talking about, again, the whole thing about looking for that idea, looking for that problem and looking for a vacuum perhaps almost. So is there a shift, you think, in that sense? Is there?
Absolutely. I think one is maybe 3, 4, 5 years back, the kind of companies that were coming about in India were more, first principles, large problems, basic infrastructure problems like e-commerce, which were very capital intensive. Now India has, over the last 5, 6 years, gotten used to online transactions, e-commerce. Companies are becoming smarter about the kind of problems that they're solving, and I would argue they don't necessarily need as much capital to scale up. Also, capital is no longer cheap. Capital is chasing much more first principles innovation. And therefore, it is important that your idea or your business model holds water.
Anu, come in here at this point. Now, you are into genomics, a DNA testing startup. When we talk about the areas that India, of course, needs tremendous focus on, I think top will be education and health. This is undoubtedly the focus, and it's for the government. We haven't really seen too many entrepreneurs and startups in the last few years, but suddenly that seems to be changing, and you really are a pioneer. To all those who sort of would want to know, what does it take to go for something which is away from the pack, really, which is not something which the herd is doing? How do you do that? Because that will really, in a sense, change the India as we know it.
Absolutely. I think the problem is that, instead of entrepreneurs chasing the money, I think if we start thinking about solving real problems that India needs, then I think the money will chase the entrepreneurs. So I think, and in the beginning, I think as the ecosystem was starting to grow, I think a lot of people started doing the wrong things, which was, essentially saying that if there is a trend, let's follow that. But, entrepreneurs in the true sense would actually do something that can passionately solve a problem that they are working on. And I think, for me personally, it was about being able to solve something that, if you look at healthcare in the way it was at that point, you really couldn't solve it by just adding more hospitals and adding more doctors, because you couldn't add as many doctors as you wanted to. And therefore, you needed to do something that was going to be disruptive, right? So I think it was more like, being so clear that you will be able to solve a problem, and therefore you pursue that without thinking about about how you're going to actually do all of it at the same time. But eventually, I think once you start thinking about it, you have background, you build a good team, slowly that starts to change. And I think that's the way we've been able to build the companies that we have in genomics, by being able to believe that we can solve a large problem. And I think similarly there are lots of other entrepreneurs today that are also following that. And I think health is something that a lot of people actually do care about, because it does influence, it does affect all of us eventually. So a lot of times I think we have seen a lot of entrepreneurs who have been in other businesses, but eventually they do start to see that there is value in healthcare, because it is going to affect them, it is going to affect their families, and it is going to affect the people around them. So I think, once that reality hits, people will start to think about problems that we really need to solve.
She said you identify a problem and you sort of believe you can fix it, and then you don't worry too much about the consequences. The rest will follow. That's easier said than done, isn't it? I mean, don't you sort of have sleepless nights when you were starting out, you know, that what will happen? Is there a plan B, C in place, or is that not important, or what about that?
So one is lots and lots of sleepless nights, but I think the risk is significantly, overemphasized.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. I mean, what's the risk?
Explain that.
If you think about it, I don't know anybody who has died of entrepreneurship. People have died of crossing the road, but nobody's died of entrepreneurship, right? The worst is that you spend a few years of your life trying to solve a problem and you get nowhere and the company shuts down and you lose some money. But that doesn't really sound very bad, because at the end of those few years you would have a lifetime of learnings, a lifetime of experiences, and even if you were to go back and get a job for yourself, you would, a lot of employers would hold you in good stead. We have a lot of entrepreneurs who work at Urban Club and they have been phenomenal. And I have never looked at them as employees. Yeah, I've always looked at them as team members and co-partners.
But that's true of entrepreneurship, I think, because within your community, within the startup community, failure is a good word. It's okay. You've experienced it. You've burnt your fingers. You perhaps know what not to do.
Yeah.
Which is great. Which is what sets it apart. Wouldn't you say so?
Absolutely. See, fundamentally, entrepreneurs are risk takers, right? You are trying to do something that nobody has done before. You see a world that is in the future and you want to build towards it. There's always going to be risk. 99 out of 100 startups are always going to fail. That's what you sign up for. But if you think about the risk every single day, if you think about what if I fail, then you won't be able to get anywhere. You have to look towards the vision that you've set out for, march towards it, and hope for the best.
And hope for the best. Wow. Risk taker, that appetite for risk is just fascinating. I know that I don't have it, which is why I don't have it for what it takes to be an entrepreneur. But that really sets them apart. Nishant, I'm told that you're finally back with us and you can hear us loud and clear. Thank you so much for your patience there. The weather gods, and there's so little we can do about it. Though here in Delhi this morning, we're not complaining. Finally, there is some respite. How long it'll last, of course, anyone's guess. But let me just fill you in. We've just been talking about what it takes to sort of create the India of our dreams, to build companies that are going to sort of change India's tomorrow, in a sense. Now, we know that the appetite for risk, Abhiraj has just spoken about that, is sort of something that's important. And the point he's making is founders don't, or entrepreneurs don't really worry about it too much. It's sort of just like, it seems to be almost like a go with the flow, believe in yourself, and somehow something will work out. And if it doesn't, too bad, you haven't lost too much, you're still around. Like he said, that entrepreneurship, nobody died of entrepreneurship. What else do you believe is that Indian founders have, which sort of sets them apart from the rest, maybe even other founders globally?
What we really need over here is some role models who've done some things which are really innovative. For them to be courageous enough in taking those risks. And also we need an ecosystem which is more accepting of the innovation that, they have within themselves for it to come out. But if we can get those things together, we can really get the system very innovative. All of the buzz about the lack of innovation in Indian startups, etc., I believe is because of the fact that, we are still evolving and we are getting there.
Prashant, India is said to be in this new report, India's 60th most innovative globally. We love comparisons with China. Now, China is at 22nd on this report, America at 4th, and Switzerland right on top. So, India, perhaps not where we'd like it to be, but it's still sort of, at 60th, I don't know how to make of it. I don't know what to make of it, but how do you see this? Is this a fair representation of where we are?
India is moving fast, if anything. Are we there yet? Of course, there's a long way to go. I think just the fundamentals of entrepreneurship are there. The fundamentals of education are weak. So we don't have a research mindset. We have a problem-solving kind of a jugaad mindset. Some of that jugaad becomes innovation, some does not. So if it's a leaking faucet, you can put a glue there and make it work for today, or you can just solve the plumbing for good.
Say 2 years ago, the big banner headlines were all about India startups. Every other day, there was something about a new unicorn being created. It was, frankly, the headlines seemed to be all about money then, and the money coming in, and the investors, and, the billion-dollar valuations and all of that. In the last 1.5 years, especially, things have changed. And while some say we are sort of on track because, we are cooling down and we needed to sort of cool off to sort of get perspective and get a reality check on where we are, the naysayers will say that this is a space that has been over-glamorized or over-romanticized, and sort of now this is reality. How do you sort of balance both the narratives?
Well, I guess it is part of growing up from both the entrepreneurs as well as the investors, because we went from investors being, watching very carefully, quarter on quarter before investing into any company, which was for my first startup. That was the case, right? The second time around, I think now what we are seeing is that they started looking at very large investments, because they hope that if you put in X, and if X was large enough, then 10X of that would be very, very large enough. So even if a lot of other startups fail, they still make a lot of money. Unfortunately, the math doesn't always work out that way. And I think maybe there is a realization that in the end, I think if you really want to see disruption, you have to invest in an idea that is likely to be truly disruptive, not just necessarily an idea that needs money today, which is 10X, but you need an idea that will probably likely to actually disrupt the way that things are done today.
Absolutely, undoubtedly. Nishant, come in here. When the headlines are the way they are at present, how do you as an entrepreneur really sort of keep your head down and keep your focus? Because the news is always there's always doomsday predictions, it seems, from here on.
I think a big part about what sets entrepreneurs apart from other businesses or other people in general is that discipline. And I think that becomes very crucial for now as well. It's all about being persistent. So you have to be persistent when there are headlines on, page ones of newspapers, dailies, and even when they're not. Or, when sort of investors are there behind chasing you, and even when they're not. Because the fact is that if you are persistent and if you are sort of adding your bit every day, your product will, show for itself. And especially in a consumer internet world that we are in, consumers in India really value good products and innovative products. And if you can do your bit, then investors will come around chasing you. At least that's been our experience.
How do you sort of see the Indian consumer really? How difficult are we as consumers? How challenging are we?
I think first of all, the Indian consumer, I sort of agree with Nishant. The Indian consumer doesn't care about, is the ecosystem going through a boom or a bust. They want value. And the Indian...
The paisa vasool that we are famous
Absolutely. I think a lot of people feel that Indian consumers don't pay. I disagree. I think Indian consumers pay, but they are very, very particular about value. And if you can show them the value and actually deliver the value, the Indian consumers pay. Now, of course, can we have a lot more consumers who are paying? Sure, we can. At this point of time, we probably have 25-30 million Indians who fall into the middle and upper middle class who can truly pay and are sort of truly transacting online. And the hope is that over the next 10 years, this number will multiply itself and therefore will lead to a very large internet economy and overall a very large and healthy economy. But even now, I think the average Indian consumer is very discerning, very value conscious, and the pool is large enough to create large companies.